Do you believe in still like a heaven and hell?
I believe this is hell. People are demons. People are evil. We create evil as people on Earth.
Today we are ranking the albums of death, and we're starting with Scream Bloody Gore in 1987. Still often pointed to as the first true death metal record, thanks in no small to Chuck's demented vocals and guitar work. There's still plenty of thrash influences on the raging tremolo picking, but then you've got more doomy, atmospheric stuff like Zombie Ritual, and Chris Reifert's drumming here would very much carry into his work with Autopsy. And then more killer tracks, Infernal Death, Evil Dead, and of course the closing title track, not a dud among them really. An incredible debut with raw, unbridled power and aggression that I think still holds up perfectly to this day, despite being among the first to transition from thrash metal to the death metal sound. And again, obviously there's also things like Possessed, but like this is sort of the big daddy, so we're gonna put this one at perfection. I absolutely love this record. They followed that up with Leprosy in 1988. Scott Burns engineering, making for a shift in sound from the last one, among the first starting what would become known as the death metal sound. Bill Andrews stepping in on drums and Rick Ross, that name always gets me, on guitar. Great musicianship, picking up largely where Scream Bloody Gore left off, but also broadening out with more dynamics and complexity. The songwriting feels a bit more mature without losing the intensity. I go back and forth between the debut and this one, and it's a strong one in its own right with headbangers like the title track, Born Dead, Left to Die, and of course Pull the Plug, but once more, every song is great. I'd say I like this one just as much as the debut for all the same reasons, and also a few improvements as well, so it is also going to perfection. Then we have Spiritual Healing in 1990. You can hear the maturation in the lyrics with the shift away from gore to more topical themes, as well as working on more complex and ambitious compositions. More technical elements here, but they also throw in some doomier riffs again and experiment a bit with more effects, which is interesting if sometimes a little bit meandering. And speaking of guitar, it's all courtesy here of James Murphy, who would go on to play with Cancer, Testament, and on Obituary's Cause of Death. Evolution in production. I really respect the increased attention to detail when it comes to the songwriting, with all the neat pace changes and more dynamic approach, and I also really dig those eerie screams with the additional effects on them, but I wouldn't say I find myself quite as consistently engaged as on the two previous albums overall. Favorite tracks here, Living Monstrosity, Low Life Genetic Reconstruction, and the title track. Not among my top favorite death albums, but even the worst death albums tend to be a cut above the rest. Like, for those who have watched my rankings of death metal albums by year, which by the way you should, every single one of these made the top tier. This one is going to amazing. We got Human in 1991. Death basically setting another blueprint with this one, this time for what technical death metal would become, pulling somewhat away from the old school sound to something a bit more machine-like. There is no denying the incredible performances on display, and backed by another stellar lineup in Paul Masvidal and Sean Reinert of Cynic and Steve DiGiorgio of basically every metal band in existence. That said, this continues to be one of my least popular hot takes, as despite being such a landmark album and often fan favorite, it's actually on the lower end for me, since I find it to be very cold and detached in comparison to the previous releases.
Inconceivable.
I think especially by the time we get to Cosmic Sea, it just feels a little bit too much like style over substance for me personally. Don't get me wrong, I love stuff like Gore Guts and Artificial Brain, but even those tend to connect with me a little bit more than some of this does. And I'd even go so far as to say it puts me in a weird sort of anxiety state when I listen to it. I'd be really curious if anyone else out there can relate to that and comment about it. These are all just my opinions, by the way, so please do share yours down below. But once more, even my lowest ranked death albums are still among the best in the genre of their given year, and I really do like Lack of Comprehension. This one is also going to amazing. We have Individual Thought Patterns in 1993. One of their best lineups of all time here, if you ask me. You've got Chuck with Andy LaRocque on guitar, Steve DiGiorgio on fretless bass, and Gene freaking Hoglan on drums. To me, this feels like the perfect melding of the speed, intensity, and personality of their early albums with the more technical and melodic elements of Human, which is why I tend to prefer to this one as Human but better. Mentally Blind is also one of my favorites of this more technical phase, and another one that I had an immediate response to, but really every track here is fantastic, making for a highly rewarding runtime. Great opener too, and Overactive Imagination really setting the tone. Inhuman Form has some really sick hidden pace changes, and I love how each riff really seems to build on the last one. Also love Nothing Is Everything, Destiny, and the title track. Killer Atmosphere on closer The Philosopher as well. If Scream Bloody Gore is my Ride the Lightning favorite for its more raw flavor, Individual Thought Patterns is my Master of Puppets more mature and technical pick. So this one is going to perfection. Then we have Symbolic in 1995. Another one that upset people on my previous ranking when I said I don't care as much for this certified classic as well.
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Again though, similar to Human, I struggled in really making a connection, but I've definitely warmed to it over time, and I like it more with each listen. The guitar work and atmosphere are again undeniable, and Hoglan once more killing it on the drums, but I just find the songwriting again to be a little bit meandering at times. Strong start in Symbolic with more fun pace changes. Zero Tolerance is a little all over the place, but I dig the groovy parts a lot, and same goes for the build on Empty Words and some of the hooks on 1,000 Eyes. Perennial Quest may be my least favorite closer, though it is also not without its moments. But for me, Without Judgment, Misanthrope, and especially Crystal Mountain are my personal favorites. I do think that this is better than Human, and there is plenty to appreciate and discover with each listen. I like it a lot more now than I did before. It's going to fantastic. Before I get to my last pick, just a reminder to hit the like button if you're enjoying the video, or hit the dislike button if you're mad. Also, stay mad. Also, if you're new here, subscribe for hundreds of more videos just like this one. I have over 1,000 at this point, and if you're a longtime viewer, consider becoming a channel member or joining the Patreon for early access or little extra emojis and perks like that. But that brings us to The Sound of Perseverance in 1998. The final album with the lineup of Chuck, Shannon Hamm, Scott Clendenin, and Richard Christie. Apparently some of the songs were originally meant for Chuck's other project, Control Denied, but ended up on here. Kicking into high gear right from the top with Scavenger of Human Sorrow, really leaning into the progressive elements, love the exotic sounding melodies in certain areas, and in general still evolving their sound to the very end. Lots of big powerful progressive riffs that fit the album title. I think it still suffers from being a little bit meandering and long-winded at times, but it also feels more ambitious in scope than the last time. Sometimes to its benefit, others to its detriment. Bite the Pain, also great. I dig Ripping Flesh and the power it holds. Love the surprise middle section of Story to Tell, but Spirit Crusher may be my personal favorite with those wickedly raging guitars. Chuck also mostly going for higher screams on this one as opposed to the lower death growls. Ultimately, it's imperfect, but I think it makes for a great swan song for a very important legacy. Better to go out on top than to turn into a cheap imitation of yourself. So I'm putting this one at fantastic, maybe slightly above Symbolic for me. Y'all check out this playlist for more death metal rankings, or this video for your personal YouTube recommendation, but that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.